Thank you, everyone. I have stickers. So I'll hand them out. Here you go.
I'm Laura Foote. I am the executive director of YIMBY Action. We have now as of yesterday, 82 chapters in 27 states doing pro-housing activism in their local communities, advocating at the local, state, and federal level, endorsing candidates, getting active for individual housing projects, and generally raising the alarm about America's housing shortage. Sonja.
Hi. I'm the executive director of Yes in My Backyard, and we do this C3, C4 thing that hopefully you guys are familiar with. The IRS, and I'm saying this because this is a technical and such a smart and educated crowd, that the IRS makes everybody have two organizations if you want to actually do politics.
At least two, sometimes like 5 or 6.
Yeah, the C3 receives money from like foundations and people who need a tax deduction, and the C4 is able to spend money endorsing candidates. So we have both, and we operate kind of like co-executive directors because we have overlapping board and staff.
But Sonja is in charge of the meanest part of our operation, the most badass part, the lawsuits, where we do housing enforcement when cities inevitably break the law. So organize to fight bad housing policy and
sue cities to defend good housing law. So we have both sides, right? We like get people together to address their governments, local, state, and federal, and say we need better laws. And then once those laws are in place, guess what? Not self-enforcing. You still need advocates to go to cities and say, I see that you're ignoring this state law, and we'll sue you unless you follow it.
So I moved to the Bay Area in 2014. I was the less employable trailing spouse of the husband who got the job at Facebook. And it was very obvious that we had a housing shortage. Apartment hunting was miserable, and everybody I became friends with had a different kind of story that I eventually figured out was a housing shortage story. I had a friend who was living with a hoarder. I had a friend who was commuting 2 hours to work as a barista because their parents would let them live in their garage, and they were making everyone feel like these were stories of personal failure, as opposed to what was obvious is that we had a chronic housing shortage that was being driven by policy choices, and that the San Francisco and every city in the Bay Area had a planning approvals process that was completely insane. This is a beautiful version of the insanity drawn by YIMBY artist Alfred Wu, but mostly it was hideous and ugly, and it still happens in most American cities.
Yeah, and the reason that we're doing this talk here is that we think the people who are here care about something that at least part of the solution is a political solution. And for many of these things, the elite opinion, the policy opinion is actually not that controversial. And that's how housing was.
I mean, I want to point out these are all 2014 or earlier.
Right. That's what this is examples of.
Right. It was in the news. It was in the all the academics, all the elites. It was, I think continues to this day. There are more white papers to back up that we have a housing shortage driven by policy choices. But it was not a new idea that we had that this was some bullshit.
Yeah, we were not doing like an elite persuasion. Like everybody kind of agreed, but also people believed that there wasn't political support for the solution, and that this was the common wisdom, right? Voters hate housing. There's no political will for change. There's nothing we can do. And that's the thing that we thought was both wrong and also like skill issue. So we'll say more next. So what we started doing is trying to make pro-housing folks visible, right? So there are pro-housing folks out there. Are they the majority? Actually, in this case, they are. But even if they're not, it's the visibility that really matters, is making sure that electeds can see that there are pro-housing folks in their community. And is working.
Yeah, how many people have heard about zoning reform, permits? I mean, you're here, so it's a little selection bias. But the success of the pro-housing movement, I think, is undeniable. Cities and states across the country are adopting it. And you can see these are just our internal numbers. We've grown over the past 10 years. These are out of date, in fact. These is our chapters plus other organizations. And I think this is Brookings Institute's from 2022. I think this is wrong. They stopped counting well in 2022 because we have seen continued growth of our chapter growth. And, the issue continues to be popular in more organizations all the time. And I'll say the talk I used to give all the time, I would go to like a group of mostly the people who would be willing to come out to these things were other stunted millennials. And I would say, how many of you believe there's a housing shortage? All the hands go up. How many of you are paying too much in rent? All the hands go up. How many of you know who your supervisor is? Your city supervisor? All hands went down. How many of you know what a supervisor is? All the hands remained down. There's this big gap problem between the people who were aware of what the problem is and what the solutions they might be willing to advocate for, and who is making decisions and what the avenue to those decision-making points are.
Yeah, we definitely had to and continue to have to do a lot of education for people to connect the outcome they see in the world and who are the decision makers and how are these decided. That's fine. It's part of the work. You get in the face of the elected, right? You make sure that they know that there are real people. And I actually look, how many people are in this picture? Not that many, right? This is a small city. There's probably 30 or 50,000 people in this city. But this elected is having an experience of like, oh my God, I met so many people who want more housing. So it's not about like a poll. It's about like actually
being the last person they spoke to.
Yeah. So we have, more slides on that. So we bring people to show up and, get in the newspaper. People who are writing, journalists, I don't want to make it sound like they're lazy at all, because they're absolutely not. But they do need to be able to write stories on a short deadline. And a really great way of writing a complete story is to just write about a hearing, which means if you show up at a hearing and you make a point and they need to have both sides, they'll just quote you. And then they'll put the name of your group in the paper. It doesn't matter if your group only has 3 to 5 people in it, right? Now suddenly they have to show both sides. You're one of those sides. So it's a real flywheel effect. If there are public venues, you bring people to those venues and then, get more visibility. Again, it's all about the visibility. It echoes down the chain.
And I want to say one thing that I see people coming from more corporate is that there's an idea that like you have to have a pulled together vibe and present to the press something well thought out, thorough, be able to have a one-on-one with a reporter and kind of have a professional attitude. That is the opposite of what local politics is. It is all the other lunatics and you too. And so, being a real human who just like has random opinions is the only requirement for getting a ton of local press about political issues.
Yeah, they like that because reporters also like to feel like they're finding a story.
Local events. These are all the things we do to drive visibility for our chapters and to make them comprehensible, understandable, and a political force. Having a happy hour and inviting a local politician to come to your happy hour is such a low lift and has a crazy disproportionate impact on the way that they think about the issue.
Social media is a huge part of it. Fortunately or unfortunately, electeds definitely are looking at social media. They are noticing when they're getting a lot of likes or a lot of upvotes or downvotes. And the housing issue is like many issues where there's concentrated harms and distributed benefits. And for decades, all of this public process was captured by the concentrated harms folks because they were motivated. They knew where to show up. And to the point where many people in our progress community, in the abundance community, believe that public process can only attract people who are the concentrated harms folks. But actually, like literally the invention of the internet allows the distributed benefits folks to organize. And that has been a huge part of the story. And we can't undersell it. The technology changed and it has actually changed the way some of these structures of governance can be used. So this is what we were saying before, is that the politicians don't really listen to polls, or they don't listen as much as you might think. They are much more like your CEO who makes decisions based on the last person they talk to. I mean, it's just a thing about human nature. You're awake for 16 hours a day. If one way or another you can monopolize as much of that 16 hours, whether it's an individual, a newspaper thing that they see, those are kind of the top things.
And they're not entirely wrong to not listen to polls, right? The person who answers a poll is not the same kind of person as the person who will throw them a happy hour.
Exactly.
Is not the same kind of person who will donate to their campaign. Is not the same kind of person who will organize the block party that will tell all of their neighbors about who the local candidates are. Especially the further down you get as far as local candidates, the more likely they are to need a smaller group of passionate supporters. And so that's what we produce. We, with our little engine here, produce passionate groups of vocal public supporters to counterbalance the existing highly engaged people in the opposition. So this is our ladder of engagement. On the left, you'll see active, inactive. You can apply this to any issue, right? I make this very generic, right? Anti-housing, pro-housing, you can put this for any issue. And we can think about who are all the different types of people here, right? So like we got our NIMBYs over here, our organized opposition. My grandmother's over here. I love her dearly. And then we've got, average people who maybe don't know what time the city council meets at or what kinds of decisions or who their mayor is, right? Those are kind of normies down here, right? And our job constantly and through the mechanisms we discussed previously is activating, engaging, and moving people up our ladder of engagement. With many issues, you've got your online social media chatter where everyone circle jerks and agrees with each other. And the point is to have activation points where you can nurture those people so that they're not just doing the social media people, but they're getting on your list. They're getting into your existing community so that they can then be triggered for further activism and run up that ladder of engagement and become the kind of person who hosts a happy hour, who takes the bite that they can take when they can take it in their community, who is then willing to come out when it's time to mobilize for SB 79. I see my California YIMBY people just came in. When it's time to mobilize for your state legislation, there are people in the district who are willing to come out to that meeting that you're setting and say, I am a constituent in the district. Look at my beautiful face. I want you to vote yes on this. And that is the most compelling piece of evidence for an elected official, the most determining factor about whether they are going to actually support your legislation. And the problem historically has been that the organized opposition has been very well organized. They have pulled decision-making down to the level of government where they have the most power. And it is our job to mobilize these other alternative sorts of power for them in order to counterbalance that and move decision-making to better places.
Yeah, a lot of people think that politics is about getting people who disagree with you to agree with you, but it's kind of not. It's actually finding the people who agree with you and getting them more active. So don't waste your time.
I don't want to say don't waste your time, right? There's a lot of good work that happens convincing some number of people, but that is not the work of organizing, right? And I think you should think differently about, right, when we're in the paper, some people's minds are shifted, but not very many. And our work particularly, and you should know what category you're in, right? If you're going to be mobilizing for political change, it's mostly about this.
So we are the client in California, which is very cool. Private nonprofits, housing organizations can sue. That's true, I think, in Texas also. And anywhere you are, if you're working on legislation, try to get private nonprofit enforcement, because a lot of these laws are written thinking the developer is going to sue, and the developer is not going to sue. It is not good business. So how do we decide what to focus on? We have to have something that is easy to explain to our members for the most part. Something where there's like a good bad guy. So it is a lot about like a sexy story, because part of the point of this is to motivate people. Another very important part, maybe should have been one or two, is that the locals have already been involved. Part of the whole point of doing these things together is to leverage the community activism. So we want the electeds to be like, oh, there's a bunch of people that were telling us to do the right thing, and like we didn't, and like they said they were going to sue, and now they did sue. You want to have that whole package together. And then it's something, you want to do something that actually matters, like a problem that you see over and over and over again.
I mean, that's the other part that I want. We do this so by default that I think it's probably actually in the number one is high impact legislation is about identifying the laws that are frequently broken. And so you're wanting to identify that perfect case for this. The first and the one we enforce the most often is the Housing Accountability Act, which is this ancient
1982.
1982. Okay. Not
It's
ancient.
not ancient. It's younger than me.
Okay.
So by 1 year.
But long ignored, right? And the law says this ridiculously dumb thing, which is you have to follow your own rules, which can't believe
your own
we
zoning.
needed another law for that. But we did in California. Cool. And we use that frequently. And part of the reason why we pick those lawsuits is that when you win them, you then are able to just threaten other cities. So a huge amount of the work that we do is picking the lawsuits carefully for the best case law to be making. And then you can shift into sending threatening letters mode for most of those. And that is also why having those on the ground activists identifying projects and seeing where the law is going awry and knowing how to activate and bring us in is really powerful.
We decided early on that we were never going to get involved with CEQA. And I'll tell you why. It's because it's the other side. So when NIMBYs are using the environmental laws, it's to stop a project that's getting approved. So there's no role for us, right? We're here when the city is messing up, is disapproving, and we sue the city.
We are involved on the other half, which is the CEQA reform half.
Yeah, that's the politics side.
The politics side, right? And so big supporters of I don't know how many people followed the California CEQA reform that recently had. This seems like a nerdy crowd. So yeah. So we do get involved on the political reform half of that. We don't start a chapter officially until you have 3 people who are willing to, in our system, be called leads. And they manage the chapter, they will set things. And it's sort of if you can't get 2 other people who are willing to work with you, you probably shouldn't be running a chapter. And so that's been our big, you often as sort of somebody who can get along with one you need 2 people you can get along with. And then they're off to the races.
Thank you so much, guys.